Ethan Quinn's thumb hovered over the decline button on his phone, his Aunt Meredith's name flashing on the screen for the third time that week. The luxury penthouse around him suddenly felt like a prison as he reluctantly answered, knowing exactly what she wanted and dreading it with every fiber of his being. "For the last time, Aunt Meredith, I can't possibly make it to the family reunion. I have 3 major acquisitions happening that weekend," Ethan said, pinching the bridge of his nose as he stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's skyline. "I don't care if you're buying the moon, Ethan James Quinn. It's been 3 years since your mother's funeral, and you haven't seen a single family member since. You're coming to this reunion or I'll tell everyone about the summer you were 15 and got caught with." "Fine," Ethan interrupted, his face flushing. "I'll be there, but just for Saturday. I have to be back in New York by Sunday evening." His aunt's triumphant laugh echoed through the phone. "Perfect. The lake house next weekend, and Ethan, try to remember you're more than your bank account." Ethan ended the call and tossed his phone onto his Italian leather sofa. At 34, he'd built Quinn Ventures from nothing into a shipping and logistics empire worth billions. His company controlled ports across 3 continents, and his name appeared regularly on lists of the world's wealthiest individuals. But family. That was a commodity he hadn't invested in for years. The following Saturday, Ethan's Bentley crunched over the gravel driveway of his late grandparents' lake house in Connecticut. The sprawling property had been in the family for generations, the massive New England colonial sitting majestically among towering oak trees. Cars already lined the long driveway, modest sedans and SUVs that made his luxury vehicle look ostentatious. "Just a day," he reminded himself as he stepped out, buttoning his tailored suit jacket. "Smile, nod, and be on a plane back to civilization by tonight. Uncle Ethan." A small tornado of energy slammed into his legs. His cousin Mark's 10-year-old daughter looked up at him with wide eyes. "Mom said you're super rich now and probably wouldn't come." Ethan awkwardly patted the girl's head. "Hello, Emma," he hoped that was her name. "Is everyone inside?" "Yup. There's tons of food, and Aunt Meredith said if you didn't show up she was going to drive to New York and drag you here herself." That sounded like Meredith. Ethan took a deep breath and followed the child inside, bracing himself for the onslaught of family he'd deliberately avoided for years. The house was just as he remembered: wide plank floors, beamed ceilings, and the smell of his aunt's famous pot roast permeating everything. As he stepped into the great room, conversations paused and 24 pairs of eyes turned toward him. "He actually came," someone whispered. His Aunt Meredith emerged from the crowd, arms outstretched. "The prodigal nephew returns." She pulled him into a hug that nearly knocked the wind from him. "You look thin. Don't they feed billionaires these days?" "I eat just fine, Aunt Meredith," he said stiffly. "And apparently buy your personality off the rack at Distant and Cold," she quipped, though her eyes were kind. "Come in, say hello to everyone. They're family, not shareholders." The next hour was a blur of hugs, handshakes, and awkward conversations. Cousins he barely recognized introduced spouses and children. Uncles clapped his back too hard and asked about his business in ways that showed they had no idea what he actually did. The entire time, Ethan kept glancing at his watch, calculating how soon he could leave without seeming completely rude. He was pouring himself a much-needed scotch at the bar when his cousin Mark approached. "The mysterious tycoon graces us with his presence," Mark grinned, clapping him on the shoulder. "Seriously though, it's good to see you, Ethan." "You too," Ethan replied, finding he actually meant it. Mark had been his closest friend growing up, before careers and life pulled them in different directions. "Listen, there's someone I want you to meet. My wife's best friend from college is staying with us for a few weeks. She just moved back from Paris," and Ethan held up his hand. "If this is some kind of setup, I'm not interested. I don't have time for relationships." Mark laughed. "Not everything is about you, Mr. Billionaire. She's helping with my latest restoration project. I just thought you'd like to meet someone who won't ask you about your stock portfolio or if you own a yacht." Before Ethan could protest further, Mark was leading him toward the back porch. A woman stood at the railing, her back to them as she gazed out at the lake. The late afternoon sun caught in her dark hair, which fell in loose waves down her back. She wore a simple sundress, and even from behind, something about her posture made Ethan pause. "Daisy," Mark called, "come meet my cousin, the one I told you about." She turned, and Ethan felt something shift inside him. She wasn't conventionally beautiful in the way the models and socialites he occasionally dated were. Instead, her beauty was warmer, more real. Her eyes were a deep brown, slightly upturned at the corners, and when she smiled, dimples appeared in her cheeks. "So this is the infamous Ethan Quinn," she said, extending her hand. "Mark's been telling me stories about you all week." "All good things, I hope," Ethan replied automatically, taking her hand. Her grip was firm, her skin soft, but with calluses that spoke of someone who worked with her hands. "Hardly," she laughed, "but I found Mark exaggerates, so I was reserving judgment." Something about her directness caught him off guard. He was used to people being deferential around him, carefully measuring their words. "Daisy Thompson," she continued. "I'm helping Mark restore that disaster of a Victorian he bought downtown. Daisy is a master carpenter," Mark explained. "Best in the business. She spent the last 5 years restoring historical buildings in Europe." "That sounds far more interesting than what I do," Ethan found himself saying. "I doubt that," she replied. "Running a global shipping empire seems pretty fascinating. Though I imagine the board meetings are less satisfying than the feeling of bringing a 200-year-old staircase back to life." Mark glanced between them, a smile playing at his lips. "I'll let you two get acquainted. Daisy, try not to believe everything my grandmother tells you about him later." Ethan wasn't actually the devil as a teenager. As Mark walked away, Ethan felt suddenly unsure of himself, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. "Would you like to walk?" Daisy asked, nodding toward the path that wound around the lake. "I've been inside all day helping with food prep, and this view is too beautiful to waste." Ethan checked his watch out of habit, then stopped himself. "Yes, I'd like that." They strolled in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the late June air warm but not oppressive. Birds called from the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a motorboat hummed across the water. "So Mark tells me you haven't been back here in years," Daisy finally said. "Any particular reason, or just the usual too busy making billions excuse?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're direct." "Life's too short not to be. Plus, I spend my days meticulously planning how to restore things without anyone noticing they've been touched at all." "It's nice to be straightforward about something." Ethan considered deflecting but found himself answering honestly. "My mother's funeral was the last time I was here. She loved this place more than anywhere. Coming back, it felt like I'd have to face that she's really gone." Daisy nodded, her eyes softening. "I understand that. My father died when I was in college. I couldn't go back to his workshop for almost 2 years. Now it's where I feel closest to him." They rounded a bend in the path, and the house came back into view, its windows glowing gold in the early evening light. "What kind of restoration are you working on with Mark?" Ethan asked, eager to change the subject. Her face lit up. "The old Henley house downtown. It's a Queen Anne Victorian built in 1887. Someone tried to modernize it in the 1970s, which was basically architectural sacrilege. We're restoring the original woodwork, fixing the stained glass, rebuilding the wraparound porch." She spoke with her hands as much as her words, passion evident in every gesture. Ethan found himself captivated not just by what she was saying, but by her enthusiasm for it. And the original banister was actually hiding under 3 layers of paint. "I spent 2 weeks stripping it down to find this gorgeous black walnut." That she stopped suddenly, looking embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I tend to get carried away talking about my work." "Don't apologize," Ethan said. "It's refreshing to meet someone who cares so much about what they do." "And what about you? Do you enjoy running your empire, or is it just something you're good at?" The question caught him off guard. People usually asked about his success, his wealth, his latest acquisition, not whether he actually enjoyed it. "I built the company from nothing," he said slowly. "My father thought I was crazy to start it. Shipping wasn't sophisticated enough for a Quinn. When it succeeded, it felt like vindication. Now, he trailed off, suddenly uncertain. "Now it's just what you do," she finished for him. He nodded, surprised by her perception. "Dinner." Aunt Meredith's voice called from the porch, breaking the moment. "Everyone inside before it gets cold." Ethan realized with a start that they'd been walking and talking for nearly an hour. For the first time all day, he hadn't been counting the minutes until he could leave. Inside, the family had gathered around the enormous dining table that had seated generations of Quinns. Ethan found himself maneuvered to sit next to Daisy, with his cousin's children across from them pelting him with questions about whether he owned a helicopter. He did. And if he'd ever met Taylor Swift, he hadn't. Midway through the meal, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Glancing at it under the table, he saw his CFO's name. Any other time, he would have excused himself immediately to take the call. Instead, he silenced the phone and returned it to his pocket. "Everything okay?" Daisy asked quietly. "Just work, it can wait." She smiled, and something warm unfurled in his chest. As dinner progressed to dessert, Ethan found himself drawn into family stories and updates. His cousin Sarah had just been promoted to hospital administrator. Uncle Jim had finally retired and taken up woodworking, which prompted a 10-minute conversation with Daisy about proper chisels. Mark's oldest was starting college in the fall. How was that possible when Ethan remembered him as a toddler? After dinner, most of the family migrated to the porch for coffee and conversation. Ethan found himself helping with dishes, standing beside Daisy as she washed and he dried. "You know they have machines for this now," he teased. "I could buy your cousin a top-of-the-line dishwasher tomorrow." "Where's the fun in that?" she replied, flicking soap bubbles at him. "Besides, doing dishes is when families share the best conversations. My mom called it sudsy therapy." "Is that why you volunteered us for this duty?" "Partially," she admitted with a smile. "Also, I saw you checking your watch during dessert. I figured you might need a graceful exit strategy before Aunt Meredith corners you for a lecture on why you're still single." Ethan laughed. "Am I that transparent? Only to those paying attention." She handed him a serving platter. "So what's your escape plan? Private helicopter landing on the lawn, secret tunnel under the house." "A car service, actually, much less dramatic." He hesitated, then added, "It should be here in about an hour." Something like disappointment flickered across her face before she masked it with a smile. Of course, empires don't run themselves. They finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and when they rejoined the family outside, Ethan found himself genuinely enjoying the stories and laughter. His Aunt Meredith caught his eye from across the porch and gave him an approving nod that made him feel both pleased and slightly irritated. When his phone buzzed with the notification that his car had arrived, Ethan felt an unexpected reluctance to leave. He made his rounds, promising to stay in better touch and accepting invitations he suspected he might actually keep. When he reached Daisy, she was sitting on the porch swing, a glass of wine in her hand. "Heading out?" she asked. "Unfortunately, yes. Early meeting tomorrow." "On a Sunday." "International business. Time zones wait for no man, not even a billionaire." She smiled at his self-deprecating tone. "It was nice meeting you, Ethan Quinn. You're not nearly as intimidating as your Google results suggest." "And you're far more interesting than I expected my cousin's friend to be," he replied. Then, acting on an impulse he didn't quite understand, he added, "Would you like to have dinner sometime? In the city, perhaps. I know some excellent restaurants." Daisy considered him for a moment, her head tilted slightly. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't think so." Her response startled him. Women didn't usually say no to him. "May I ask why?" he inquired, genuinely curious. "Because I don't date men who are just passing through," she said simply. "You're heading back to your world of boardrooms and business jets, and I'm here restoring an old Victorian, different orbits." "I see." Ethan felt an unfamiliar pang of disappointment. "Well, it was a pleasure meeting you, Daisy Thompson." "Likewise, Ethan Quinn." He nodded, turned to leave, then paused. "What if I wasn't just passing through?" Her eyebrows rose. "Are you planning to give up your empire and take up carpentry?" "No, but I could come back for the 4th of July weekend. Mark mentioned there's a celebration in town." A slow smile spread across her face. He did he? And yes, there is fireworks over the lake, a ridiculous small town parade, the works. Sounds excruciating, Ethan said with a grin. I'd love to see it. If you actually show up, Mr. Quinn, I might reconsider that dinner. I'll be here, he promised, surprised to find he meant it. On the drive back to the city, Ethan found himself thinking not about the upcoming week's meetings or the acquisition in Singapore, but about the way Daisy's eyes crinkled when she laughed, and how passionately she described restoring a banister to its former glory. 2 weeks later, Ethan's driver pulled up to the lake house again. This time, instead of dread, he felt a flutter of anticipation. He texted Mark to let him know he was coming, but asked him not to mention it to Daisy. His cousin met him at the door with a knowing grin. Well. The return of the prodigal billionaire, and only 2 weeks after the last visit. Should I be checking for signs of the apocalypse? Very funny, Ethan replied, clapping him on the shoulder. Is everyone here already? Most of the family is down at the lake setting up for the barbecue. And before you ask, yes, Daisy is here. She's in town fixing some catastrophe at the Historical Society building, some emergency with their staircase before tonight's fundraiser. Ethan tried to look nonchalant. I wasn't going to ask. Sure you weren't, Mark laughed. She'll be back by dinner. In the meantime, you can help me haul these coolers down to the lake. The afternoon passed pleasantly. Ethan found himself relaxing in a way he couldn't remember doing in years. He played catch with Mark's son, discussed hospital administration with his cousin Sarah, and even let his Aunt Meredith tease him about his fancy city clothes. It was nearly sunset when a pickup truck rumbled up the driveway. Through the trees, Ethan could see Daisy hop out, toolbox in hand. She was wearing jeans and a tank top, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, sawdust visible even from a distance. She stopped short when she spotted him among the family at the lakeside. You came back, she said when he approached. I said I would. People say a lot of things, she replied, but she was smiling. How was the Historical Society emergency? Challenging. Someone thought it was a good idea to use drywall screws on a 150-year-old balustrade. She shook her head in mock horror. Criminal, sounds like it. I hope you were able to save it, of course, she said with a hint of pride. Though I need a shower before I'm fit for human company, save me a burger, I'll do better than that, Ethan said. I'll grill you a fresh one when you get back, her eyebrows rose. You cook. I can manage not to burn meat on an open flame. It's one of my few non-business-related skills. I'm intrigued, she laughed. Give me 20 minutes. When she returned, her hair was damp and she'd changed into a simple sundress not unlike the one she'd worn when they first met. Ethan felt an unfamiliar nervousness as he handed her a plate with the burger he'd prepared. Let's see if billionaires know how to grill, she teased, taking a bite. Her eyes widened appreciatively. Not bad, Quinn, not bad at all. They sat together on the dock, feet dangling over the water as the sun set. The conversation flowed easily, jumping from her work to his, from childhood memories to future plans. As darkness fell, fireflies began to blink over the water, and the sounds of the family gathering faded into comfortable background noise. I'm glad you came back, Daisy said quietly. So am I, Ethan replied, surprised by how much he meant it. The 4th of July weekend extended into a pattern. Ethan found reasons to return to Connecticut nearly every weekend through July and into August. He attended the town's ridiculous parade with Daisy, cheering as Mark's kids marched with their scout troop. He helped her sand floorboards in the Victorian she was restoring, ruining an expensive shirt, but feeling oddly satisfied by the physical labor. They had dinner in the city too, both at the Michelin-starred restaurants Ethan knew and at the hole-in-the-wall places Daisy discovered. She introduced him to her world of historical restoration, and he found himself increasingly fascinated by the way she could look at something broken and see not just what it was, but what it could be again. By late August, Ethan realized with a start that he'd reorganized his entire life around these weekends. He delegated more to his executive team, stopped taking calls during dinner, and even considered opening a satellite office in Connecticut. One warm evening, they sat on the porch of the now nearly restored Victorian. Daisy was explaining the complex process she'd used to recreate the house's original crown molding. Ethan watched her hands as she gestured, noticing the small scars and calluses that told the story of her dedication to her craft. "What?" she asked, catching him staring. "Nothing. I just like watching you talk about your work. It's not very exciting compared to international shipping deals." "That's where you're wrong," he said seriously. "What you do, you're preserving history, creating beauty. Most of what I do is just moving numbers from one column to another." She studied him for a moment. "You don't really believe that, do you? Your company employs thousands of people. You move essential goods around the world, that matters." "Maybe," he conceded. "But lately I've been wondering if I've been focusing on the wrong things." "Like what?" He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing over her calluses. "Like thinking success can only be measured in dollars. Like avoiding family because it's easier than feeling the loss. Like not making time for the things, the people that matter." Daisy's expression softened. "That sounds suspiciously like personal growth, Mr. Quinn. Terrifying, isn't it?" He laughed. Then more seriously, "I think I'm falling in love with you, Daisy Thompson." Her eyes widened, but she didn't pull her hand away. "Are you sure it's not just the novelty? I'm not exactly your usual type." "That's precisely why. You see me not the billionaire, not the CEO, just me. And somehow you still seem to like what you see." "I more than like what I see," she admitted quietly. "But Ethan, our lives are so different. You run a global company. I spend months obsessing over the right finish for a banister. So, I can run my company from anywhere. Most of it's done virtually now anyway." He squeezed her hand. "These past 2 months have been the happiest I can remember. When I'm with you, I feel grounded, like I've found something I didn't even know I was missing." She leaned forward and kissed him, a soft, questioning kiss that quickly deepened. When they finally broke apart, she was smiling. "I'm falling in love with you too, Ethan Quinn, despite my better judgment." "The best decisions often defy judgment," he replied, pulling her close again. By Thanksgiving, Ethan had opened a regional office in Hartford and was splitting his time between New York and Connecticut. He'd bought a house not far from the lake, a historic property that needed restoration, of course. Daisy had taken on the project with enthusiasm, though she insisted on maintaining her own apartment in town. "I need to know you want me for me, not as your personal restoration expert," she'd explained. Ethan understood. Trust took time to build, especially for someone as independent as Daisy. The family reunion that year was at his new house, with Aunt Meredith supervising the cooking while secretly marveling at the change in her nephew. She cornered him in the kitchen as he was checking on the turkey. "You know, when I forced you to come to the reunion last summer, I just wanted you to remember you had a family," she said, nudging him aside to baste the bird properly. "I never expected you'd find the love of your life and move half your business to Connecticut." "Life is full of surprises," Ethan replied, watching through the window as Daisy showed his youngest cousin how to properly sand a table leg on the porch. "She's good for you," Meredith observed. "You smile now, you listen when people talk, you're present." "She reminds me what matters," he said simply. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and the family gathered around the fireplace in his restored home, Ethan knelt before Daisy and opened a small box. Inside wasn't a diamond ring, as everyone expected, but a small, worn carpenter's plane. "It was my grandfather's," Daisy whispered, eyes wide. "How did your mother helped me find it?" Ethan explained. "I know how much you miss having a piece of your father's legacy." Tears welled in her eyes as she took the tool reverently. "Ethan, thank you." "There's something else," he said, reaching into his pocket and producing a small velvet box. This one did contain a ring, an antique emerald surrounded by diamonds in a vintage setting. "I thought about getting something modern, but then I realized what would mean more to you." "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's from 1887, he said. "The same year as the Victorian we've been restoring. I had it authenticated and carefully refurbished, just like you would have done." "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Daisy's voice trembled slightly. "Daisy Thompson, you've helped me restore parts of myself I thought were lost forever. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation, pulling him to his feet and into her arms as the family erupted in cheers around them. They were married the following spring in the garden of their restored home. Ethan had scaled back his work hours permanently, focusing on strategic decisions while his trusted team handled day-to-day operations. Daisy had expanded her restoration business, taking on apprentices to preserve traditional woodworking techniques. At the reception, Mark raised his glass for a toast. "To my cousin Ethan and my dear friend Daisy, proof that sometimes all it takes is a meddling aunt and a family reunion to find your perfect match." Ethan caught his Aunt Meredith's eye across the room and mouthed a silent, "Thank you." She winked back, clearly pleased with her matchmaking success. Later, as they danced under the stars, Daisy rested her head against Ethan's shoulder. "Did you ever imagine when your aunt forced you to that reunion that this is where you'd end up?" "Never," he admitted. "I was too busy looking at what I'd lost to see what I might find. And now I understand what real wealth is," he said, pulling her closer, "and it has nothing to do with my bank account." Daisy smiled up at him. "Who would have thought a billionaire shipping magnate and a carpenter could build such a beautiful life together?" "We're just restoring things to how they should be," Ethan replied, "one day at a time." As they swayed beneath the twinkling lights, surrounded by family and friends, Ethan Quinn, billionaire, reluctant family man, and now happily married, felt truly at home for the first time in years. The empire he'd built would always be there, but this connection, this love, this family was the true foundation he'd been missing all along.